All right, here we go. So just doing a relatively quick review of week 5 of my payout challenge. And I guess the first thing to say is it was a good week. Any week that you end in the green and you follow your rules doing so is a good week. To start off with, I kind of want to talk about the process before I go into any of the details. And by the process, I mean my weekly reviews, which I find fundamental to improving my trading and improving other aspects of my life. I do this weekly, monthly review system with about anything I'm looking to improve in my life. Now, when it comes to trading here, what I basically do is let's even look back a little bit like at last month for a couple of red weeks here, getting started in this payout challenge. And basically what I do is I'll look at an entire week's worth of trades and I'll evaluate them. And I'll show you in a minute what I'm looking at. But I'll come up with 1 to 3 of the biggest improvements to make from this week, and then I roll it over into the next week. And I continue that pattern going week by week until I iron out all of the issues and or turn any unwanted habits into good habits, whatever changes I need to make. I roll from week to week to week. And you can see that here. I kind of document it in my Discord server, which I created a private Discord server for my own journal. But last week was August 4th, and I write out my goals from the previous week, where I'm noticing my issues from the previous week. So, for example, keeping my stop loss tighter, check. Don't break even on any trades, check. Don't TP early and get my 2R, check. Increasing risk, and this was related to trading, but obviously wasn't a trading to do. It was dial in my sleep so I didn't miss any trading days. And so last week, when I reviewed all of my goals, I met them. And where these goals come from, these improvements come from, is the data. And if we go back to TradeZella, which I use TradeZella for quite a bit. I like to track my P&L, my trades themselves. All the data comes from TradeZella. And what I really like about TradeZella is not only is it a journaling and a data software, but it's also a backtesting software. And I'm a big proponent of doing tons of backtesting. And it's the only software out there that's both and at a lower cost. So like, for example, there is FX Replay. And I've used both FX Replay for backtesting and I've used TradeZella for backtesting. And I found TradeZella is pretty much on par with FX Replay for the same cost, but you also get journaling software and you get trade statistics, which is really helpful. So I got this filtered down to here, which, by the way, there's a link below if you're interested in TradeZella. I got this filtered out to this last week, which is okay. And it was a mixed bag of results, and I'll explain. Or I was going to quick talk about where I get my data from. So basically what I do is I go through every week and I look at each day and I figure out what went wrong and what went right. And here, one of the ways I do that is we can come into the reports section of TradeZella and I can filter by my tags. Like, for example, one of the tags I want to check out is any of my losses for this week. What was the expense reason? Why did the trade fail? And I'll tag it with some description of what happened there. And also, I'll go in and you can look at individual trades in TradeZella and you can see more data about each trade. And I'll show you, pull that up actually. For me, it's just a little easier to kind of pull the data into a quick spreadsheet. And in this case here, I go week by week and I figure out what went wrong on the trades and what improvements could be made. Like, for example, last week I saw I really need to hold for 2R on my trades because they all hit 2R. Week before I saw I didn't need my stop loss all the way down at the bottom of this. I kind of find my improvements. Now in the case of this week on Monday, I had no trades. And I'm going to move this away over here real quick. And so what I do is I organize it in that spreadsheet so I can kind of get a good picture of everything that's going on. Now, if I want to break down, so then I go through each individual day and I say, okay, cool. Monday I had no trades. And I went back to Monday and I looked at the price action to determine maybe I missed something. Maybe I was, what was the reason why I had no trades? Because sometimes you miss a good trade and that's an important piece of data too. In this case, I had no entries on Monday. So I was cool. That was a good day. And then on Tuesday, I had one win, which was this trade here. And this was a neat win because I took profit to the tick before the reversal. And this sometimes happens where you're off sides, but you still win. And the bias was actually bearish, but I got my 2R out on that trade. Wednesday, I had 2 losses, and this is where it starts to get a little interesting for me. I'm gonna pull that up right here. So on Wednesday, I went short and I was off sides. And then I flipped long, but I got stopped out. So those were the 2 expense reasons that I noted. I noted I was off sides. And then I noted here that my stop wasn't quite big enough. And then the question became, well, why? And in this instance here, you can see all these lines. Price was between multiple higher time frame PD arrays. And when that happens, we can get these high resistance runs, these seek and destroy style runs. So there was the lesson I took out from last week, because it happened on more than one day, was that if price is in between higher time frame levels, which it even was today, I need to be super cautious and maybe even be hands off. Additionally, in those times, I need to widen out my stop a little bit, which up until this day, hadn't been necessary. My stops were way too wide. My data was showing that I shouldn't have a tighter stop loss. And here it was showing I needed a little bit wider of a stop loss, because normally I would be down here if I'm going long. I know short, but you can see the short would have been up here, right? My data was showing I needed wider stops. So switched over to that, working out well. Now on this day, it didn't work. And then here on Thursday, now you'll notice there's no trades on Thursday. I actually took 2 losses. And what had ended up happening was right here. I took these on the wrong account. And so I didn't count it in terms of my P&L for this challenge because it just wasn't on that account. I can't move it. I can't change that. But what I did do is I did count it. I looked at the issues and I'm considering it in my head in terms of all of the data, because what happened on Wednesday here happened on Thursday. Pattern played out again where I don't have the levels marked on this screenshot here, but price was in between 2 higher time frame levels, and because it was in between 2 of them, it really didn't want to go anywhere. And the same thing played out where I got faked out. I went short first and got stopped out. I was off sides, and then I went in long. I was on sides, but in this case, I got stopped out too quickly. And see here, off sides, stop too close. Off sides, stop too close. Now in this case, that would have been a long, brutal trade before it played out, but nonetheless, it's still the same pattern. So I noted those 2 issues over here. And I figure out what I'm going to do going forward. And this is how I come up with my improvements for the next week. Now here on Friday, I took a win, which was... Oh, were those 2 screenshots the same? Oh, these were the same. I meant to share this screenshot of Thursday, where I took a loss and a loss back to back. Here I was seek and destroy price action. I was off sides, or my stop was too close, and then I was off sides. So it was just the inverse on that. But nonetheless, the idea is the same. I just showed the wrong screenshots. Now here was Friday. And this is what I'm talking about by when price is wanting to move, it moves. And you can see how even here, when price was not between 2 PD arrays, price came down into this higher time frame discount level and shot off of it. And you can see how even with my stop loss being as wide as it is here, it's still way too wide. You know, I could have gotten away with a much narrower stop loss. And that was what I'd been seeing in my data. And why I evaluate every trade from all these different angles to determine what's the improvement. Because yeah, as a winner, but I'm also noting the stop was a little too wide. I had been, like before it was down here at the swing. So you can see I reduced my stop by 33%, making my target much more achievable. So kind of gives me mixed feelings in terms of like, well, this last week, because on one hand, I'm green, right? But if those 2 losses had been on this account, I would have been break even. And so I'm just noting that, you know, going forward, I feel like it was a little bit of luck in that sense. But I also learned some lessons here that I'm going to carry forward into the week. And what's important here about these lessons is I want to show you this cumulative P&L. So here's this week's P&L, but I'm going to clear this out and show the trade data for this whole challenge so far. This is what I think is so interesting is you can see the account balance was here at 0, and I went into drawdown, which I've noticed is a pattern when I start trading a new account or I start a back testing session, I go into drawdown. Usually I come out of it quicker than this, and in this case, I dip down once and I usually start coming out. I dipped down twice here and started coming out of it. And you can see this approach of looking at each and every week and finding out what to improve and rolling it over into the next week is what's bringing this account out of drawdown. So when I look at this current week then, I want to evaluate what went wrong and what to improve upon. So that comes from a couple of places. It comes from obviously how I manually put this data in the spreadsheet because it's just easier for me to see. But also it comes from over here in TradeZella. And if I look here at, the chat messenger is popping up at me. If I look over here at, sorry, I got thrown off with the chat messenger, kind of messing some stuff up. You know, I look over here at my tags for my losses, all my trades that are tagged, and I look to see if there's any patterns. One of the big patterns in these losses that I found was the PD array salad, which is, again, just being in between higher time frame levels. That really messed me up last week, and having a slightly tighter stop than I should have. And those were both combined, because if price is in a PD array salad, then in between higher time frame levels, then I might want to run a larger stop loss, or I might want to stay out altogether. So the other thing that I think is neat and I want to show is on the TradeZella reports tab, you can break down everything from days, months, trade time, trade duration, and you can see your performance. And I finally felt that I had enough data from the last month to start looking at some of these reports. And it was super interesting. Look at my Wednesday. Wednesday, I tend to trade the most at 13 trades. I tend to have the most losses on Wednesday. Huge piece of information. And additionally, Friday happens to be my best day. So I'm going to implement that going forward by, for one, I'm going to further evaluate the previous Wednesdays and figure out if there's any patterns in that I need to be aware of. But I also know when it comes to Wednesday, I need to be more conservative and I need to back off. I need to trade less, just purely. So that's my worst performance. Now, additionally, what I like is you can break it down into trade time. And there's tons of different stats that you can look at. But one of the things I like is go down to the 5-minute here on the trade time and look for within my sessions, where is my worst trading time? And we can see here that 9:45 approximately, I tend to have my most losses. So there's 3 losses right there. Additionally, I'm going to look here at the PM session. And I have 3 losses down in there too. So those are my 2 worst performing times. We can see that 11:45 is my best performing time. So that's data that I'm going to use to make improvements to my system. And in this case, one of the things that I know is with the 9:30 macro, and I'm going to show you it was on both of these screenshots where I took back-to-back trades. This is exactly what's happening where I need to wait to the next macro and find a setup. And so that's one of the things that I'm going to implement going forward next week. So basically what I do is after I've evaluated the data for the week, I've reviewed the previous week, I've evaluated the data for the current week, and I want to see. And I say, I roll over any goals that I think are pertinent. So in this case, I'm going to still not break even on any trades. I'm going to not TP early. I do want to increase risk. Now I added, I'm going to stay away from PD salads. And I added, I'm going to have 2 trades in 1 macro only. Wednesday is low risk and picky, right? Now, the only other thing is I noticed I had 2 trades that were the stop was too tight, and that kind of conflicts with the previous goal, which was keep my stop tight, right? So how I'm going to reconcile that is I'm just going to go forward with a tighter stop loss because more of my data suggests that a tighter stop loss is better for me, especially if I'm staying away from those mixed higher time frame resistance support zones. And if I do happen to want to get into a trade in any of those zones, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in with either A, low risk, and or I'm going to go in with a wider stop. I hope that makes sense. That's kind of how I look at every week. I comb through the data, I comb through the trades, I find out what's the biggest improvement that I can see, and I just implement that as my goal for the next week. And then I hold myself accountable because I have these categories here in my journal where I come back and I review it every Sunday typically. Now today's Monday, but that's okay. I just didn't get to it yesterday. So, all right. So that wraps up, my week. The trading week was overall pretty good. I still feel like there's a lot of improvements to be made in my trading. And I feel like I'm just finally getting into the swing of things with this challenge. And I'm really liking seeing this cumulative P&L increasing. But one of the big things I want to do is I want to make sure I'm not focusing on the P&L because that's still going to screw me up. It always has. And I got to just be aware of it, but not focused on it, not care I'm in the green. Because this is a dangerous zone right in here when you're just above break even and you kind of start flip-flopping and it can cause some emotions. So ignoring the P&L, my big concern is, am I adhering to my rules? Am I keeping my emotions in check? And that, by and large, has been the case. So yeah, I'm stoked. I'm looking forward to this current trading week. And I hope that by sharing this kind of like reflection system, well, for one, it's just me documenting my journey here and me putting it out there in hopes that maybe someone gets some value out of it. So anyways, that's that.